The sun had just begun its slow descent behind the jagged Afghan mountains, casting long shadows across the arid terrain. Lieutenant Ramirez wiped a layer of sweat and dust from his forehead as he crouched behind a pile of crumbling stone. His squad of Navy SEALs had been inserted under cover of night for what was supposed to be a low-profile intelligence recovery mission. A quiet operation in retrieve the data and exfil before sunrise, but things had unraveled fast. They had made it to the compound without being detected. The intelligence officer embedded with them had successfully downloaded the encrypted files from a hidden drive buried in a steel-reinforced wall. But the moment they stepped back into the open, the silence broke. A sniper round cracked through the air, followed by a sudden eruption of gunfire from 3 surrounding hills. Someone had tipped off the insurgents, and the entire valley had turned into a death trap, pinned down behind half-collapsed mud walls and scattered debris. The SEALs fought to hold their ground. Return fire echoed through the narrow pass, but for every target they took down, more emerged. The enemy wasn't just spraying blindly, they were coordinated, communicating from elevated positions with mortars and light machine guns. Someone with battlefield experience was leading them. Ramirez ducked as another round pinged off a chunk of rock inches above his head. "We're boxed in," he shouted to his team sergeant, "Chief Herrera, any chance that comms pack still works?" Herrera yanked at a cable running from the radio unit strapped to his back and shook his head. "They're jamming everything. Closest satellite's not giving us a clean line." Ramirez clenched his jaw. He knew they couldn't wait much longer. If those mortars started walking their shots inward, it'd be over. Then, an idea: he pulled out the emergency burst transmitter, a last resort device for dire situations. One button, one ping, pre-coded with their location and a priority support request. He hesitated just a moment. This was only to be used when things were truly beyond salvage. He pressed it. Somewhere far above them, a satellite received the ping. A signal was bounced, relayed, and finally interpreted at a nearby forward operating base. With a single instruction, air support requested. High risk. Immediate danger. The digital alert lit up on a screen before a duty officer, who flagged it for rapid response. The closest available aircraft was an A-10 Thunderbolt II, affectionately nicknamed the Warthog. The pilot on standby didn't hesitate. Back on the ground, time moved like sludge. Ramirez counted every explosion. Dust filled the air with each new impact. One SEAL, Corporal Jensen, had taken shrapnel to the leg, but kept returning fire, his blood soaking into the cracked earth. Then came a noise low and unnatural, like thunder caught in a canyon. Ramirez tilted his head toward the sky. Others did the same. The sound was faint at first, like distant growling, but it grew louder, layered with a metallic rhythm that vibrated through the rock. It wasn't a helicopter, not a drone either. The SEALs looked to one another, uncertain. "Did someone get through?" Herrera asked, barely audible over the whine that now filled the air. Ramirez squinted toward the ridge, eyes scanning the horizon. Dust kicked up around them. The sky changed. There, slicing through a beam of fading sunlight, flew a dark silhouette, broad, ugly, unmistakable. The A-10 WARTHOG. But something was off. No radio contact. No danger close warnings or coordinated instructions. No call sign. Not even a greeting. It just appeared, and then, without slowing, it dove. The sudden flash of the 30mm GAU-8 Avenger cannon firing was followed a moment later by its signature sound, a mechanical growl, steady and destructive. A line of fire cut across the ridgeline like a scalpel, and within seconds, the enemy's mortar crew was gone. Plumes of dirt shot upward like geysers. Men who had minutes ago been coordinating an ambush were now scattered wreckage. One of the SEALs let out a laugh, short and disbelieving. Holy hell, more targets fell. An enemy truck trying to reposition was hit before it cleared a rocky ledge. It rolled down the hill in flames, exploding at the base with a thunderclap that shook the valley floor. Still, no voice from the sky. No pilot ID. No confirmation. Nothing. Just precision. Just power. Just a machine of war piloted by someone who didn't need to say a word. Elise Ward, call sign Blizzard, was in control, back at base. Few had known she was on shift. Even fewer knew she often flew without speaking, letting her actions serve as the only communication. It wasn't arrogance. It was focus. Elise didn't just pilot the Warthog. She became it. Every movement, every calculation was instinct sharpened. By years of combat dialed up in the sky, Elise looped her aircraft into another run, her eyes tracking multiple heat signatures. Below, the seals were already moving, renewed by her unexpected arrival. Ramirez didn't know who was flying that jet, but he silently thanked them. She had just bought them time and maybe saved their lives. And the sky rumbled again. Captain Elise Ward sat in the narrow cockpit of her A-10 Thunderbolt II, eyes focused, hands steady. The low grumble of the engines was like music to her. Each vibration reminded her of the aircraft's history, its rugged design, its brutal precision. The Warthog wasn't glamorous, but it was deadly, and it had never let her down. She didn't need anything fast or sleek. What she needed was a weapon that could survive hell and still fly back home. And the A-10 did exactly that. The moment the emergency ping came through, Elise had responded without a second thought. No hesitation, no radio check. She simply grabbed her helmet, ran across the tarmac, and climbed into the waiting beast. The ground crew scrambled to refuel and arm it, but they knew Elise no unnecessary chatter, no wasted movement. She didn't ask what the situation was. She only needed coordinates. Everything else, she would figure out in the sky. She had been flying combat missions for 6 years now, dozens of successful airstrikes, hundreds of flight hours logged under fire. But despite her record, some still doubted her. She'd heard it all. Too quiet, too careful, too calculating. But in battle, Elise's silence became her strength. Her focus was unshakable. And once she had a target, it rarely lived long enough to understand what had happened. She adjusted altitude, flying low through a canyon to avoid early detection. Below her, shadows shifted as she banked hard, following the curves of the terrain. Her A-10 was armed to the teeth 1,174 rounds in the 30mm Avenger cannon, to laser-guided bombs, infrared pods, and flares she hoped she wouldn't need. This wasn't a recon flight. This was a rescue, and she was going in alone. The mountain air was turbulent, but she welcomed it. It kept her alert. She reached for the throttle, checking systems, watching the infrared feed light up with flickers of heat signatures across the valley ahead. Something was definitely happening. Multiple sources, likely ambush positions, judging by their spacing and the heat radiating from a few barrels. These weren't just guerrilla fighters. This was coordinated. Whoever had sent the distress ping wasn't facing amateurs. Elise narrowed her eyes, analyzing the terrain. A pass between two ridges, scattered compounds, smoke already rising in some areas. She spotted for stationary heat blobs tucked along a cliff, probably mortar teams. Further west, 3 vehicles idled near a structure, likely support trucks. But what drew her attention most were the small movement trails near the rock formations. They told a story: enemy fighters flanking through cover, trying to surround someone. They had a plan, and they thought they were about to succeed. Not today. She tapped the targeting system, marked the mortar positions, and cut her radio completely. No distractions, no requests for clearance. These soldiers needed help, not protocol. Her eyes locked on the first cluster, and she dove. The nose of the Warthog tipped forward, and the valley came into full view. Elise felt the sudden rush of gravity, the way the air pressed against her chest and helmet. But she didn't flinch. Her thumb pressed down. The Avenger cannon roared. Tracer round streaked toward the cliff, and then came the impact. The mountaintop shuddered, dirt and bodies scattered like debris. One position gone. She didn't wait to admire the hit. She adjusted pitch and lined up the second. 3 seconds later, another burst lit up the slope. Flames licked the ridge where the enemy had once crouched. Still no radio chatter. Still no warnings. Just execution. On the ground, the SEALs had no name to assign to the angel above them. All they knew was someone was watching, calculating, eliminating targets faster than they could even call them out. Ramirez stared at the sky between bursts of fire, trying to spot the aircraft through the haze. He caught a glimpse just as the plane banked, revealing the unmistakable shark mouth painted across the nose of the Warthog, a relic from an older war, still carrying fury into a new one. Who the hell is that? Her era muttered beside him. Ramirez just shook his head. No idea, but whoever it is, they're buying us time. Back in the cockpit, Elise took a steadying breath. She checked her HUD. One of the enemy trucks had started to move, trying to retreat behind the buildings. She didn't let it. A quick maneuver put her in line, and a single guided bomb dropped silently from beneath her wing. It struck with eerie precision, ripping the vehicle apart without harming the structures around it. Controlled chaos, She climbed, scanned, looped, and dipped again. Another movement on infrared. A sniper team repositioning near a communications mast. She switched to the cannon, traced their heat trail, and fired. Gone. She didn't need confirmations. She didn't need thanks. Up here, she was alone with her decisions. And down below, lives were depending on them. The sun was lower now. Shadows grew longer. The battlefield looked like a painting streaked with smoke and flame. But for Elise, there was no beauty in it, just a job that wasn't finished yet. Her fuel was halfway. Her ammo still decent. But she knew the moment she turned away, that team on the ground might be overrun again. So she stayed. The next run began. The SEALs advanced through the wreckage, cautious but no longer desperate. The tide had turned in their favor. Ramirez moved between shattered walls, his rifle up, eyes scanning the smoke ahead. Every time an enemy figure appeared in his scope, they were already dropping from a well-placed cannon burst. Whoever was flying above was watching their backs and doing it with uncanny timing. They hadn't heard a word on the radio since the airstrike began. No clearance calls, no warnings. Not even the standard overhead advisories pilots normally gave when danger close fire missions were underway. Nothing but the low, menacing growl of the A-10's engine and the explosive punctuation of its Avenger cannon. "She's not talking to us," Herrera said, half in awe. "She's just watching, like she sees everything." Ramirez ducked into cover and nodded. "Feels like she's already a step ahead, above." Elise circled tightly, keeping eyes on the SEALs and the hills beyond. Her Warthog wasn't the fastest jet in the fleet, but that wasn't its strength. It could linger, stay low, slow, and deadly. She loved that about it. While other fighters screamed past and vanished, she remained in the storm. She flipped her targeting pod to thermal and studied the hills to the west. The heat signatures flickered near a natural rock bridge. They were attempting to move toward the SEALs' 6 o'clock flankers with likely orders to close. The escape route. Elise didn't hesitate. She banked hard, the force pushing against her ribs, and pulled into a shallow dive. No one on the ground would hear her in time. The Warthog's engines were behind her, and the mountainous terrain muffled the sound. To the enemy, she appeared out of nowhere, with one trigger pull. The cannon unleashed its fury, a quick, brutal burst. The rock bridge collapsed along with the fighters beneath it. Dust spiraled up, and a rumble echoed through the pass. She pulled up again, leveling out. She didn't need a kill count. She just needed to keep them safe. Below, Ramirez and Herrera turned toward the blast behind them. The pathway they'd hoped to retreat through was now blocked, but so were the enemy's reinforcements. Ramirez keyed his make-out instinct, trying one more time to reach the pilot. "Angel 2. This is Phoenix Actual. Can you copy?" Only static answered. Elise heard the radio crackle in her headset, but kept silent. She knew the limitations. Ground units often wanted reassurance, but reassurance meant distraction. She had already committed to silent overwatch. Every second spent talking was a second not scanning for threats. Her actions would be her answer. The Warthog curved overhead again, a looming shadow above the battlefield. SEALs below pressed forward with newfound confidence, retaking ground. They had lost earlier. They could almost feel the aircraft moving with them, adjusting like a watchful guardian that responded to danger before they even saw it. In the village beyond the compound, a truck-mounted machine gun opened fire toward the advancing team. Bullets struck stone and kicked up clouds of debris near Ramirez's feet. He dove, rolled behind a rusted water tank, and called out, "Heavy gun, north side." Before his team could return fire, the A-10 screamed it from above. Elise had seen the muzzle flashes and was already descending. She lined up her sights. The gunner never saw her coming. A thunderous burst shredded the vehicle, scattering shrapnel across the yard. Fire rose into the air. A black column of smoke painted the sky behind her as she climbed again. Ramirez looked up again and shook his head. "She's unreal." Herrera, crouched next to him, chuckled once. I don't think she even blinked. A minute passed. Then two. No more fire from the hills. No more mortar launches. The battlefield was quieting down, and the SEALs regrouped near the main target building. They had recovered the data drive, eliminated a significant threat force, and survived what should have been a doomed mission. They owed that to one person they had never seen, never spoken to, and still couldn't reach. In the cockpit, Elise took a slow breath. Her oxygen mask filtered out the dust swirling in the air outside, and her hug confirmed what she already sensed. The enemy was scattered. Survivors were fleeing into the mountains. The immediate threat to the SEALs was over, at least for now. She glanced at her fuel levels, getting low, not critical yet, but she couldn't stay much longer without risking a dead stick return. She tapped the control panel, checking her map for emergency resupply options. None close enough. She would need to head back soon. But something caught her attention, a flicker on the edge of infrared. 3 heat signatures moving, fast, downhill, from the eastern ridge, to coordinated for retreat. They were heading straight toward the SEAL's only viable exit path, likely with RPGs. She turned the Warthog again. Back on the ground, Ramirez felt a sudden chill as the air shifted above them. The engine roar returned. It wasn't random, it was protective, as if the plane had read their map and realized the exit was in danger. A moment later, Elise unleashed one last devastating pass. 3 short cannon bursts, spaced with surgical care. 1, 2, 3. 3 impacts, 3 neutralized threats, and then silence. Dust and debris danced in the air like ash after the last strike. Ramirez gave the signal to move, and the SEALs flowed through the broken compound like water, sweeping rooms and alleyways. Still no contact from the mysterious pilot, but she had cleared the way with such efficiency that their advance seemed almost choreographed. Her timing wasn't lucky, it was surgical. Every movement the SEALs made was matched by her presence above. If they turned left, her shadow followed. If they paused, she circled. There was an unspoken rhythm between the ground and the sky, forged in the fire of combat. On her next pass, Elise banked tightly, flying barely 200 feet above the rooftops. She felt the Warthog shudder slightly from turbulence, but she adjusted without thinking. Her eyes stayed locked on her infrared feed. Another enemy squad had just emerged from a hidden trench line on the north slope. 6 men, crouched low, weapons ready, moving toward the east perimeter of the compound. If the SEALs made it out and tried to loop around for exfil, they'd walk right into an ambush. She pulled into a dive again. Elise didn't waste rounds. She had trained herself to think like the infantry below. Every burst needed to matter. As she lined up the trench line, she counted half a second of cannon fire and released. The earth split apart beneath her, sandbags, bodies, and rifles scattered in the air, then settled into silence. 2 of the insurgents tried to flee, but she curved behind the ridge and caught them before they reached cover. One more problem solved. Back below, Ramirez watched her fly past with a strange sense of admiration. "She's not just helping us," he said. "She's clearing the entire valley." Her air nodded slowly, scanning the hills. "It's like she's 10 steps ahead. Never seen anything like it." The team reached the final checkpoint, an abandoned stable overlooking the path leading west to their extraction zone. From here, they had a direct route out, but they didn't relax. Elise's presence reminded them the fight wasn't over. If she was still up there, still watching, then there was still danger coming, and it was half a mile ahead, hidden by boulders and natural terrain. An enemy technical truck was being prepared. A belt-fed heavy machine gun was mounted in the back. The fighters adjusted the tripod while a third scanned the road with binoculars. They had no idea the SEALs had help from above. They thought they were ready for an easy kill. Elise saw them. Before they even powered up the engine, she adjusted her speed, switched to a precision-guided rocket, and locked in. The blast was sharp and sudden, collapsing the truck inward like a crushed soda can. The gunner never had time to scream. The road ahead lit up briefly, then fell dark again. The SEALs heard the boom and looked toward the glow. Ramirez exhaled. "She's watching our exit." Another squad member grinned. "At this rate, we won't have to fire a single shot." But that wasn't true. Just as the team began to move again, 2 insurgents burst from the lower ruins on their left flank. AK-47s barked. Bullets chipped at the stone around them. One of the SEALs, Collins, returned fire, dropping one of the attackers before diving for cover. The other took aim at Herrera. Then he vanished, cut down mid-step. Above, Elise had seen the glint of a muzzle and reacted faster than thought. A 2-second burst flattened the section of wall the fighter had used for cover. She looped and climbed again, the cannon spinning down into quiet. Herrera looked toward the sky and simply said, "Thank you." Though she couldn't hear him, Elise felt it. She didn't need to hear gratitude. She saw it in the fact that none of them were bleeding out on the rocks below. That was her satisfaction, but the mission wasn't done yet. Fuel was dropping, below 20%. She couldn't stay in the air much longer, not without risking emergency landing somewhere hostile. Still, she hesitated. The SEALs were moving now, carefully and quickly, toward the extraction point. She saw them cross the final checkpoint and regroup behind a rusted bus. They were scanning the hills, covering each other, trusting no silence. She tapped her display, scanning the area one last time. Then she saw it. Two fighters in the rear of a half-destroyed building, crouched with RPGs aimed at the road where the SEALs would pass next. They were patient, waiting for the perfect shot, released of one final time. She fired the short bursts, one for each window. Both men were thrown from the structure before they ever knew. She was above. As she climbed again, smoke trailed behind her slightly, not from damage, but from overworked engines running hot. She pushed the Warthog to its limits that are. She looked down once more. The SEALs had moved on. The last threat was gone. It was time. With a steady hand, Elise turned eastward toward the distant horizon. No flares, no celebration, just a silent departure. The extraction zone was just 2 ridgelines away, but the SEALs didn't let their guard down. Their boots moved carefully over the loose rock, every rifle scanning in different directions. They had made it this far thanks to one unseen guardian in the sky, but they knew better than to think the fight was truly over. Sometimes the last threat was the one that killed you. Ramirez moved in front, peering down at the route ahead. The narrow valley funneled into a flat clearing beside an old dried-up river bed. It was the only flat ground a chopper could land on, and that made it predictable and dangerous. Any ambushers left would expect that escape path. Behind him, Herrera whispered, "Hawk reports, signals good. Bird inbound. 8 minutes." Ramirez gave a nod. Plenty of time to get shot. Suddenly, the ground beneath them vibrated slightly. Not an explosion, a low-frequency hum. Then came the distant roar. The Warthog was back. They looked skyward. Again, the aircraft swept low across the valley like a hunting bird, wings wide and steady. It didn't drop bombs. It didn't fire. It simply flew over them, circling once as if scanning ahead. And it was inside the cockpit. Elise didn't speak. She didn't need to. The SEALs were moving with precision, but their exit path had changed. She had to sweep a wider radius now. She leaned into her controls, eyes moving across the screen. She switched to infrared, toggled through zoom levels, and paused on a faint set of footprints near the far tree line. 3 figures, moving fast. Low body temperature, likely hiding under foliage. She guessed their plan. Wait for the chopper to arrive, then fire at the rotor or tail to disable the craft and trap the SEALs for capture. It was a tactic used before. In a tight valley like this, it could work if no one stopped them. But Elise would. She banked hard and went silent again, descending low over the ridge. She stayed out of view of the 3 hidden fighters. From their position, all they would hear was the rumble behind the mountains. They crouched lower in the bushes, thinking they had gone unnoticed. She came in from the opposite angle. One short burst from her Avenger cannon carved into the trees, shredding branches and flesh alike. The figures didn't run. They didn't even get a chance. Her round stopped just feet short of the path the helicopter would land on. She leveled out and flew on. Ramirez spotted the plume of smoke rising on the edge of the zone. "She's still up there," he muttered, more to himself than anyone else. Herrera crouched beside him. 3 minutes to bird, then we're out. One of the younger SEALs, Daniels, looked skyward and asked, "Think she'll stick around until then?" Ramirez smirked. "I think she'll be here long after we're gone." But Elise was starting to feel the drag. The fuel warning light blinked persistently. She glanced at the gauge less than 15%. Her options were narrowing. She either made it back to base barely coasting, or she'd have to put the Warthog down at a remote outpost and wait for a tow. Neither appealed to her, but the mission wasn't over. Not until the team lifted off. She pushed the thought aside and focused. There was still one pocket she hadn't swept, an old irrigation trench, near a collapsed farmhouse, just within RPG range of the landing site. Her instincts tugged at her. Something felt wrong. She passed once. Nothing. She passed again, slower. Then the pod blinked. Heat. 2 more fighters. Dug in. Launchers ready. She dropped flares to draw their attention, then swooped sideways and opened fire. The trench collapsed inward. Dust shot up in a wave, and when it settled, the field was quiet. Elise exhaled slowly. On the ground, the SEALs heard the rotor blades approaching. The chopper came in fast, keeping low, when kicking up dirt in all directions. The pilot gave a single wave from the cockpit window, signaling clear entry. Ramirez led the team in. Each one moved quickly, but none rushed. They had made it, and they had done so without losing a man. They climbed aboard. As the helicopter rose, Ramirez turned and looked back one last time at the smoking battlefield. The Warthog passed overhead again, not close, not dramatic, just present, watching. Herrera leaned over. "We should radio in a name." Ramirez shook his head. "She didn't give us one. Then what do we call her?" Ramirez watched the aircraft slowly vanish into the sunset haze. "The reason we're alive." The helicopter lifted steadily into the smoke-filled air, its rotors slicing through the heat haze left behind by a battle that almost was. Inside, the SEALs sat in silence, each one processing what had just happened. There had been close calls, near misses, a firefight that should have gone badly, but they had made it through, largely untouched. Not because of luck, because of her. Herrera glanced out the window, watching the Warthog shrink in the distance. "Never heard a single word from her," he said quietly. Ramirez nodded. "Didn't need to. She spoke plenty." As the chopper veered toward the rendezvous with the 2nd Air Unit, Elise was already climbing hard. Her fuel levels were critical now. She had pushed to long, stayed to low, and worked that old aircraft until it felt like the bolts were vibrating loose. But she had no regrets. Every shot had landed. Every pass had made a difference. She switched her systems to energy conservation mode and reviewed her route options. Returning directly to base might not be possible anymore. A forward refueling point, Outpost Kilo 5, was just within reach. It wasn't a proper airstrip, more of a dirt runway with a few tents and fuel drums, but it would have to do. The autopilot chirped a mild altitude warning. Elise ignored it. She leveled out, adjusted her oxygen, and reviewed one final scan of the valley. It looked clear. Her job was finished, but her instincts whispered otherwise. She reset the thermal imaging and zoomed out wide, scanning the rear end of the valley one last time. The SEALs were out. Their transport was climbing toward the outer airspace. No threats in pursuit. All clear. Then she saw it, a single vehicle, parked between the hills near a cave entrance, too far from the earlier engagement area to have been part of the ambush. No heat from the engine, no signs of movement, but the image struck her as wrong. Why would a technical vehicle be idle there, away from the rest of the fight? She looked again. On a hunch, she switched the sensor from infrared to electromagnetic. A subtle shimmer passed over her screen metal, carefully hidden beneath a commonet. Then came the detail that tightened her grip, a shortwave signal transmitter, quietly pulsing. That wasn't just a retreating fighter, it was a spotter, a late-stage response team, possibly a high-value insurgent or foreign-trained cell leader calling in coordinates. And they were still alive. Elise's fuel gauge was now in the red. Any reasonable pilot would break off and land. No one would have blamed her for it. But reason didn't win battles. Action did. She turned back. The Warthog dove for the last time that day. The vehicle below showed no signs of awareness until the ground started shaking. A man in tactical gear burst out of the camouflage cave entrance, yelling into a headset, pointing toward the sky. A second man scrambled for the back of the vehicle, lifting a case of equipment. Neither made it far. The Warthog released one precision bomb and followed up with a strafing run. The cave collapsed. The vehicle erupted. Fire rolled outward, catching on dry grass and gear. Pieces of metal flung into the air like burning shrapnel. Then everything went still. Elise pulled up into a steep climb, her engines groaning. At Outpost Kilo 5, a crew chief leaned against a refueling truck, scanning the horizon. Another technician beside him muttered, "She's not gonna make it." The crew chief shook his head. "She will. That bird always comes home." Minutes later, the black shape of the A-10 appeared low on the ridge, dipping slightly, slowing. With everything it had left, Elise guided it down with care, keeping her descent shallow to avoid stalling. The dirt runway rushed up to meet her. The tires hit hard. Dust exploded behind the wheels. The Warthog bounced once, then settled with a squeal of brakes and a long, rumbling sigh. The aircraft rolled to a stop just feet from the edge of the strip. Engines cut. Silence returned. The ground crew sprinted out, dragging fuel lines and stabilizing braces. Elise popped the canopy and pulled off her helmet. Her flight suit was soaked in sweat, her eyes rimmed with fatigue, but her expression never changed. She climbed down and walked past the crew without a word. A young mechanic called after her. "Did you get him?" She paused briefly, turned. halfway and replied, all of them. Then she walked into the operations tent, alone. Back at the main base, the SEALs had arrived. Debriefings were already underway, and the commanding officer paced outside the intelligence room, waiting on confirmation of enemy losses. Ramirez handed over the secured hard drive, and the tech team immediately got to work decrypting it. Within minutes, the SEAL returned with a single question. Who was your air support? Ramirez glanced toward the ceiling like he might see her aircraft through the metal roof. Angel 2, he replied. That's all we were told. The officer frowned. There's no Angel 2 listed in today's dispatch. Closest A-10 was 20 minutes out. Then someone flew through time. Herrera muttered from across the room. The officer looked between them. Whoever it was, they just took out for positions, destroyed the technicals, stopped an RPG ambush, and flattened the command node hidden inside a cave. All in one sortie. No support. No backup. Ramirez nodded and never said a word. The next morning, the desert sun glared across the landing strip at Outpost Kilo 5. Dust clung to every bolt of the Warthog's frame, its engine cover still warm from yesterday's final dive. Elise sat on a folding chair near the hangar, boots dusty, hair pulled tight, coffee untouched in her hand. Her flight log was tucked under her arm. Unsigned. The crew chief approached, cautious. Command sent a chopper for you. They want a full debrief. She nodded. How long till it gets here? 20 minutes. She didn't speak again. Her eyes stayed on the horizon. In the command tent, the forward operations team was already reviewing footage, drone captures, helmet cam feeds from the SEALs, and satellite scans every angle pieced together to build the story of what had happened in those mountains. Elise's Warthog had appeared like a phantom and vanished the same way. One of the analysts leaned back in his chair. She did the work of an entire air wing alone. Do we even have her ID yet? The officer beside him shook his head. She flew under a temporary call sign. Angel 2. No flight plan filed. No audio transmission. Just target confirmation and response. Then out. You think she disobeyed orders? No. I think she didn't wait for them. At the main base, the SEALs had gathered in the rec room, still half wrapped in bandages and sweat. Daniels was watching a silent loop of Warthog footage, mostly just blurry glimpses from helmet cams. Trailing fire across the sky, a flash of the cannon. She flew right over us, so low I could have touched the landing gear, he said. Ramirez tossed a stress ball toward him. Yeah, but you were curled behind a boulder screaming. Remember? Daniels laughed, the tension breaking for a second. Herrera spoke up. We need to put her name in the report. Ramirez nodded. We do. But nobody knows it. The young SEAL pulled a pen from behind his ear and scribbled on the back of a mission folder. Then he held it up. Elise, A-10, Angel 2. He underlined it twice. Back at Kilo 5, the chopper finally arrived. Elise stood and handed her flight log to the crew chief. If anyone asks where I went, the crew chief grinned. I'll tell them I never saw you. As the helicopter lifted, she looked down at the Warthog, the aircraft that had carried her through hell without complaint. It would be checked, refueled, maybe flown by someone else next. But they'd never fly it like she had. In the base operations center, the commanding officer waited. As Elise stepped off the chopper, she gave a brief nod and walked straight into the debrief room. The room was dark, a projector screen glowing with paused drone footage. Several officers sat along the wall, each with notepads and clipped expressions. One of them gestured to the only empty chair. She didn't sit. Lieutenant Captain Elise Monroe, the senior officer, began. You're aware your mission parameters were exceeded yesterday. I am. You responded to a call you weren't assigned to. You used live ammunition in an unsanctioned strike. You expended every round of cannon fire in a civilian classified zone. I did. He paused, then tapped the edge of his folder. You also eliminated for known insurgent targets, destroyed the enemy vehicles, stopped an RPG ambush, and neutralized a mobile command center. Correct. Another officer, younger, leaned forward. Why didn't you report in? There wasn't time. The SEALs were pinned. I had eyes. I acted. The room went quiet. Finally, the commanding officer leaned back and folded his arms. You've racked up 15 sorties in 30 days, 12 confirmed hits. You've run your bird almost to collapse, and you've done it all without a single confirmed injury to civilians. He looked at her directly. You're not reckless, Monroe, but you're not standard either. She said nothing. You'll receive no commendation for this. I don't want one. There won't be a public record. There never is. He opened a folder and slid a paper across the table. But there will be this. It was a new deployment order. No fanfare. No medals. Just another mission. Elise signed it without reading. As she left the room, one of the intelligence analysts chased after her. Hey, he called, catchy. Up in the corridor, we pulled final data from your last run. You took out a Tier 1 target hiding in that cave. Exoff turned rogue. We've been hunting him for a year. Elise paused for just a moment. He picked the wrong canyon. The analyst looked at her with something like awe. You're kind of a ghost. You know that? No radio, no chatter, no errors. She gave a faint smirk. That's how the Warthog flies outside. As she returned to the tarmac, the wind had picked up. The sun glinted off distant hangars. Elise stood alone for a long moment. Another mission was coming, but for now, the sky was quiet. Days passed. Elise's name never showed up on headlines, and the mission remained sealed in classified files. She didn't return to a hero's welcome. There was no medal ceremony, no interview, no patch for her sleeve. But among those who mattered, word quietly spread. At the sealed base, a new recruit asked, "So who's this Angel 2 I keep hearing about?" Herrera didn't answer right away. He slid a mug of coffee across the table to Ramirez, then said, "She's the one who shows up when nobody else can." The recruit looked confused. "But what squadron is she with?" Ramirez smiled. "She's not really with anyone. Elsewhere, in a bunker buried beneath a mountain." Military analysts finalized a report marked top secret. It logged precision strikes, reduced collateral damage, and sealed survival rate. The file ended with a single-line summary: untraceable pilot operating A-10 aircraft. Extreme tactical efficiency. Recommends silent commendation. Above it, a note was handwritten in red ink. She may not speak, but her cannon does. Meanwhile, Elise was already in the air again. Different mission, different terrain. This time she flew over a jungle stretch on a blacked-out flight plan. Her Warthog, newly repaired, had a deeper hum to it. The cannon was freshly serviced, the belly lined with hardpoints carrying armor-piercing payloads. No one gave her instructions anymore. She simply received a time, a grid, and a call sign. She flew solo, by choice. Below her, the landscape crawled with insurgent movement. Another allied team was boxed in. Communications jammed. No eyes in the sky, no drones. Then the thrum of her Warthog swept over them. She dropped low, not for show, but for precision. Trees splintered as her cannon roared. With each strafing run, another path opened for the team on the ground. They didn't know who she was. They never saw her face. But when the dust settled, the soldiers emerged alive. One of them looked to the treetops and whispered that had to be her. Back at base, Elise landed quietly on a makeshift strip. Ground crew waited, but she shut off the engines before anyone approached. She stayed in the cockpit for a long time, eyes on the sky, hand resting on the throttle. She didn't smile. She didn't need to. A radio crackled beside her. It was a secure frequency. "Angel 2, this is Ghost Tower. Job's clean. We'll clear the path for you out." She clicked the button once. No words. Just a confirmation. Ping. That was enough. Later, as she walked across the airfield toward her bunk, a young pilot approached. He was fresh out of school, wings still crisp on his uniform. "Mom, are you really Angel 2? He asked. She looked at him without breaking stride. "I fly an A-10. That day in the mountains. Were you really up there?" She paused. "Then, I go where I'm needed. That's it." The young pilot stood there, uncertain. Elise disappeared into the night. Inside her quarters, she unzipped a side pouch from her gear bag and pulled out a crumpled piece of paper. It was the note someone had slipped into the cockpit days ago, just before that canyon run. A handwritten message from one of the SEALs. "If we make it, we owe you a drink. If we don't, you were the last angel we ever saw." She folded it again and placed it beneath her helmet. The words had stayed with her longer than the aftershock of cannon fire. In the months that followed, stories kept surfacing in unofficial channels. Soldiers claimed they had seen a silent A-10 in the sky just when they thought they were done for. Missions that had no air support logged precision strikes anyway. Satellite captures showed nothing but shadows and smoke trails, and always the same call sign, Angel 2. Some dismissed it as myth, others, like the SEALs, knew better. One night, At a reunion gathering, Ramirez raised a glass and spoke to the team. Not all heroes wear patches. He said, some of them don't even tell you their names, but you know they were there because you made it home. They toasted in silence. Far away, over a quiet coastline at dawn, Elise took one last pass in her Warthog before heading back. She watched the sea shimmer below and the sunlight break through cloud cover. A message flashed across her console. Mission complete. Return. At will, she clicked the response. Targets clear. Ground safe. No follow-up needed. And that was it. The Warthog climbed gently into the morning sky, blending into the blue. She would land, refuel, and wait for the next grid coordinate. No one would announce her arrival. No one would record her name. But when the next call came in and another team was pinned down, someone would whisper the same words again, call Angel to, and she would come, in a story.